All right, we'll let people keep joining us here, but I'm going to go ahead and advance to our agenda. Olivia, you want to walk us through what we're covering today?
Hey, everybody. So we've got lots of fun things on the agenda. Hopefully you all are able to engage throughout the day. Please use the chat to participate, ask questions, and we will start with a kickoff. And say hello to everybody, which if you haven't already, please put where you're from in chat to say hi. We'll talk a little bit about Tableau Conference 2022, and we've got some fun questions together in a Kahoot poll to get us all engaged and excited. We have Jim here with us today, who's going to talk about data scaffolding, and we're really lucky to have him, so thank you for being here. Jen is going to kick us off and talk about Tableau filter fixes, and then we'll have a wrap up and do our giveaways.
Excellent.
Tableau Conference 2022, it is back. It is the first ever hybrid Tableau conference. We will have both in-person tickets are available for 1,900, as you can see on the slide, but there is a limit to 5,000 people. So if you're interested in attending an amazing conference, and learning everything you possibly can about data and Tableau, this is the place to go. It is an amazing place to expand your professional network and find incredible helpful resources, both in presentation format, in your networking, and they always have Tableau doctors and a bunch of vendors to help provide additional resources to you and your organizations. So there is in our conference channel on Slack, Sarah Weber has posted a pre-written justification letter if you need a little extra help getting your boss to sign off on letting you go, or if you want to find more information and reasons why Tableau Conference could benefit you. That letter is available. There's also links to the registration information, and I'm going to throw the link to the conference website in chat here just so it's handy for everybody, where you can find more information about what content will be there. I haven't been since 2017, and that was my first conference, and I have to say this is really an amazing opportunity to anybody who loves data and wants to learn more about Tableau. It is going to be in Las Vegas at Mandalay Bay, so you have that as an added incentive if you need it. But we strongly encourage you to think about attending. It is free for virtual attendees too. So if you aren't able to make it to Vegas in person, you can always sign up and receive those sessions virtually as well and participate. Jen, do you think there's anything else I missed? Did I gush enough?
You gushed plenty.
I'm
yeah,
so excited. I will be there if anybody wants to meet up.
Yeah. I was just going to add that my understanding, and the schedule is fairly limited in what they've shown so far in terms of detail, but it does appear that there will be things happening at the in-person that are not available virtually. So there will be some hands-on trainings and learnings. There'll be a data night out, which is kind of Tableau's big party and celebration for all the data folks out there. So I don't know what else will differ, but there are a few differences between the two. Not saying you won't still get some value out of the virtual, but it's not a completely same experience. All right.
Yeah, I really do think this is one of them. You've got to be in person. It's kind of magical to experience so many people in the same place that are just as excited and sometimes nerdy as you are about data. So yeah, the in-person experience, it's not the same when you attend online.
Data geeks unite for sure.
Yep.
All right.
We do.
Oh, sorry.
We do have a question in chat. Tammy's asking if anyone knows if May is going to be the month of the conference going forward. I have not heard that this is going to be a permanent change. From what I understand, Tableau is trial running this to see how it goes, trying to get content to us earlier so we don't have to wait quite as long into the fall. I don't know if anybody else on the leadership team has heard differently.
I heard the intent is to shift to the springtime. I don't know if it'll always be May, and I agree they probably want to see how this goes before completely committing, but I do think that's their plan. Jim, you want to confirm?
Yeah, that's the overall plan, and they're trying to get alignment with some of the other conferences that they weren't able to do this year. So it may not be May, but the intent is not to be in the November timeframe as it was in the past.
Great. Thank you for confirming. All right. Giveaways. So we are going to give out 3 $35 gift certificates to the Tableau store. We can get yourself a fancy Tableau shirt or a mug or a hat or whatever strikes your fancy. We'll be picking one person who wins our Kahoot poll, which we're starting in just a second. And we'll also grab 2 folks who participate today through the chat. So whether you post a question for one of our presenters, engage in some way, we want to reward you for participating and being here. So that's how we'll draw our winners. And with that, we're going to do the poll. So if you haven't played before, I'm going to start the poll in just a minute. You on your mobile device or on another screen of your computer, go to kahoot.it. And in just a minute, I'll give you the pin that you'll type in, and then we'll ask you for your name or nickname. And then you'll be watching my screen to see the questions and answer responses. And then on your screen, you'll make your choices. So hopefully that's all clear. I think a lot of you have played this before. We like to do this to have a little fun with you and get to know you a little bit better. So we'll give you the pin here in just a second. Let me get out of that screen and we'll go start our poll. Kahoot, Kahoot, Kahoot. Here we go. Okay, it's going to load the pin. I will also paste it into the chat. We'll give people a second to put that in. Okay. Oh yeah, got some players. Come on, it's fun. Everybody in. Give people a little bit more time to get the pin in there and get their name in. We only have 13 in, but we have over 60 people in the, oh, wow. Everybody just exploded all at once. That's fantastic. Okay, we'll give it just like 5 more seconds. Go ahead and join us and then I'll kick off the poll here. A couple more. 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're gonna get started. Kahoot. You're in the right place, I hope. All right, first question. No right answer here, just curious. What are you doing for spring break? Answers are rolling in. I'm actually leaving for North Carolina after this meeting. My husband and I are going to do some hiking and some wine tasting in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I'm so excited. We haven't been on a vacation in a long time, which is probably true for a lot of you. And I'm really looking forward to it. That scene looks especially appealing. There will be no hammock over a beach for me, but it'll still be fun. Oh, I'm so sad. Most of you don't have plans. Well, it's not too late to do something, even if it's just a staycation, or congratulations for those of you taking the mental vacation. I think we all could use some of that too. Very nice. All right, next question, also just for fun. So Olivia just filled us all in on the 2 different conference options. Are you planning on going in one form or another? See a lot of people responding. And most of you are doing it virtual. Okay, that makes sense. Few on the fence, few no's, and a couple attending in person. Very cool. If you are attending in person, feel free to connect with Olivia, Pat, Jim, and myself. We will probably be there too, unless something really crazy happens in the world in the next 2 months, which let's all hope that doesn't happen. Okay, now we start the real questions in the sense that you will receive points for this. Easy one to start with, true or false, is this Women's History Month? You got a 50-50 shot. Go ahead and take a guess if you're not sure. And, oh, good job. It absolutely is Women's History Month. So the next couple of questions are going to be on this theme. And let's check our leaderboard here. Congratulations, Joe. It's a tight race though. All right. This one, you're going to put some things in order. So these are some women who are Supreme Court justices, and you want to rank them from the first person who was appointed, or I should say sworn in, down to the most recent. So just kind of drag them on your screen into the proper order. And yes, this is not the complete list. They apparently only had 4 options, plus that would have made it a little harder. It's very exciting that we have at least a few women who've made it to the SCOTUS. Okay, answers trickling in here. Got about 30 seconds left. This one takes a little more time, so I gave you a little more time. Looks like most of you have answered. Last answers. Oh, we got some background music. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and skip ahead here. This is the proper order. Oh, goodness, goodness, goodness. 8 of you know your justices or got lucky. We'll give you the credit. You knew your justices. 36 of you didn't. So good thing we covered this question. All right, checking the leaderboard. Patrick rocketing to the top. Krista, Emily, Lauren, and KH. Next question, also related to Women's History Month. Which of the first ladies in our country held the very first press conference specifically geared towards women reporters? And then she had 347 more of them during her tenure. These are all first ladies, so that's not the tricky part. It's just which of them started the press conference. And while you're answering, I want to give credit to Olivia, who shared a very awesome PowerPoint with me that had a lot of women's history, and some of these questions came directly from that. So thanks again, Olivia. I learned a lot. I did not know this prior. And the correct answer, nicely done, folks, Eleanor Roosevelt, indeed. Leaderboard? Ooh, Krista taking over the lead. Emily and KH definitely still in the running. All right, another women's history question. Which of these women pioneered the frequency hopping technology that is still in use today in these other forms? I'm using Wi-Fi right now to share this poll with you. All of these women were key inventors or contributors to science and technology in some way, but one of them specifically developed this technology. Lots of answers coming in. Let's see how you did. Oh, wow, look at that split. Okay, so Hedy Lamarr was the correct answer, which quite a few of you did get. And then a nice dispersion among the other ones. So feel free to look these women up. I do know, remember off the top of my head that Stephanie Kwolek was the one who invented Kevlar. That's really awesome. That is, of course, a very important invention too. All right, last question. So we have booked a facility in Middleton. It's got a space, which you can see in the photo, where there's an indoor portion, but those big glass doors roll up. So we can keep those doors open to have good airflow. It comes with tables and chairs. We're really hoping to be able to have our first in-person meeting in quite some time on June 7th, which is a Tuesday. If things don't get worse, would you be interested in joining us at this event? So we would have our snacks like usual. We'd be able to see each other. Like I said, we'll get plenty of airflow. June should be a lovely time of year. So let's see. Looks like actually most of you have already answered already. So I'll go ahead and skip ahead. I think we've got everybody. Probably won't. Okay, fair. Good to know. Also some people who will and some maybes. All right. Well, we're going to be keeping an eye on how things look over the next few weeks and make a decision as to whether we're going to go forward or not. But it's exciting to see that at least a few of you might be joining us. So thank you for that. And with that, let's see who won our competition. All right, way to go, Sebastian. 3rd place, Emily. And number 1, getting a $35 swag certificate, KH. So we're not quite sure who that is, so please send a chat to Pat and claim your prize. Thanks for playing, everybody. All right, back to our presentation. So if you saw some of our early communications, you might have been expecting Tammy Brown to be talking about Workout Wednesday. Unfortunately, Tammy came ill and is not up for speaking for this meeting. So we're going to have her back in a future meeting. Hopefully the next one. If that doesn't work out, then the one after that. So she will be presenting. We appreciate her volunteering, but obviously she needed to take care of her health first. So that session has been postponed. And Olivia, I think I just took over your role. I'm so sorry. Take it away, Olivia.
No apologies. You did an excellent job. Our next call is for speakers and leadership team members. If anybody is interested in talking on any topic, large or small, or working through a challenge that you're having with a dashboard, or you just want to show off something that you're really proud of that you were able to work through, we are always looking for speakers. We have quarterly meetings coming up. So Q2 will be on June 7th. And we would love to have anybody and everybody participate. We can all learn from each other, and we all have very different perspectives, and it's really important to share those and talk and use this support network to work through any challenges that we have, and also receive praise for the amazing work that we've done. So please feel free to reach out to any of the leadership team members if you would like to speak. And if you want to be on the leadership team, we are lovely humans. We can always use more help, and make sure that your perspective is included when we're planning for these meetings. If you'd like to help direct, please reach out and let us know if you're interested in that as well. Okay, now for the fun part. A Tableau visionary, Jim is an independent business intelligence consultant living in Nashville, Tennessee, and he brings real-world business perspective with over 30 years of experience in product management and engineering. You may have worked directly with Jim on the community forums, where he is a 5-time Tableau ambassador, and he is also the co-leader of the Nashville Tableau user group, and he co-leads an amazing new group that got started called the Newbie User Group. So if you're interested in those groups, you definitely should join. And I will also be adding links to Jim's blog, his Tableau public account, and his Twitter handle in the chat for you to be able to connect with him and reach out later. So with that, Jim, take it away.
We've got just a slight problem. It says the host has disabled the participant screen sharing. So Jen, if you will allow me to share my screen, and we'll be in good shape.
Sorry about that. Should be all better. You should be good now. No one else jump in though. This is for Jim only.
Okay.
Does it let you share it now?
Excellent. Excellent. I hope you're able to see my screen now, and thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Madison, Wisconsin has a dear place in my heart. I've been up there several times. A little unknown fact is that I am an Ironman triathlete, and my second Ironman was up there in Madison. So Madison will always be very special to me. Today, I want to talk about how you deal with data sets that might have all the information you want in the data set, but for some reason you just can't get them to work in your analysis. And there's a special class of those that we use a scaffolding technique to reshape that data set and make it usable for your analysis. Just a word about me. Yes, I live in Nashville. I live just outside of Nashville. I'm down here because my grandchildren are down here. So yes, we enjoy Nashville a great deal. It's important for you to understand that I am not a data scientist, and I don't have an IT background. My background's in engineering, and I've also got a business degree. But you don't have to be a data scientist to love data and to enjoy working with Tableau. I spent most of my years in business as either a product manager or a business unit manager in large consumer products companies. I may have met some of you out on the forum. I am a 5-time ambassador out there, and now we're called data visionaries. We just changed that title. I've been a visionary and also a Zen master, and I'm pleased to be with you today. I don't know about you, but when I learned Tableau, it seemed like every data set I got was what I call a solid data set. It was very easy to work with. All the cells in that data set were full. There were no voids, there were no gaps. But in the real world, that's not how data looks very often. We've got gaps in the data, there's voids in the data, or sometimes the data is just plain sparse. And that's not because you're working with bad data. It's not because the data set is dirty and needed to be cleaned, but it's because of the source of the data, where the data came from in the first place. ERP systems like Oracle or SAP only collect data when a transaction takes place. So if you didn't sell a product today, there's no data in the database for today. And then you've got third-party systems that are standalone. They were designed for a different purpose. They capture all the data you want, but it's just not enough form where you can use it. Well, today we're going to look at 3 real-world examples, and these are actual questions that came into the forum. We're going to take a look at 3 different types of problems where you need to do some scaffolding and reshape the data before you can solve the problem. The first is a classic. It's a 2-date problem. It's where each record has a start date and an end date, and you want to figure out what happened in between those. We see this question, if we don't see it daily, we see it 4 or 5 times a week. The second is what happens when you have a data set that at high levels in a hierarchy, the data is real solid and you can do anything you want with it. But as you start drilling down into the data, all of a sudden the data becomes sparse and it falls apart. And the last example may have happened to you. It certainly happened to me, where you start filtering the data and you hit a combination of filters and all of a sudden the screen goes blank. Well, let's take a look at that first example. Now, this is an example that we call the 2-date problem. Every record has a start and an end date. And it's a type of data that we see coming from like money managers or people who are working in banks. They might have a portfolio that had a series of mortgages in it. Every mortgage has a start date. It has a period, and it also has an interest rate. Maybe they want to determine what their cash flow is going to be month over month. Or it could be like the user who wrote into the forum, who happened to be an HR manager. And he said, look, over the course of a year, I've had a number of job requisitions. And for each one of them, I've got an open date and I got a date that I filled the job. And what I really want to do is I want to look across each month. And each month I want to be able to look back and see how many I filled and how many were still open. He says, I've taken this data and I keep moving this around. He says, I can't get these dates to line up. He says, I really don't know what's wrong. Well, if we take a look at it, these 2 dates are independent. They really don't know each other. And when we look at dates, we kind of think, well, they're on a calendar. We should be able to work with them. We should be able to line the 2 dates up. But there is no calendar inside of Tableau that has both of those dates on it. So what we needed to do is we need to make him a calendar. And using some very simple data, and I did this in Excel because we were only looking at 1 year's worth of data, I created a date scaffold or a date ladder. And it's just the first day of the month throughout the entire year. Now then when we brought that data into Tableau, what I wanted to do was take each record in his data and attach it to each month in the scaffold date. And we do that by joining the data using a Cartesian join. And you do this with a noodle, or you can do it the old way, but you do it with a Cartesian join, where we write a very simple date clause where 1 equals 1. And that will join every record in this data set with every record in that data set. Now, once we do that, and we come back, I just have to move something here, something's in the way. And we come back and take a look at that data, and we put the month of the scaffold date on our columns. This is beginning to look like the calendar that we wanted to see. And now we can come back, and we looked at his first question. His first question was, how many jobs did I fill each month? And to do that, I use this expression, and I used an LOD because in his real data, there were a few more levels in here, and we had to use an LOD. We didn't necessarily have to do it here. But all we do with this LOD is we take a look at this date function. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this function, date trunc is a function that returns the first day of the period, and here it's the month. So if the first date of the month that the job was filled equals the first date of the month of the scaffold date, then I capture the job ID, and then we count those. So if we apply those on the calendar, we can start seeing, we see like, oh, here this job was filled in October, and sure enough, the job was filled in October, this one's in October, and so on. Now, his second question was how many of those jobs are still open each month? And we use the same sort of idea here, except here we look at both ends, and we look to see that the scaffold date is less than or equal to the date that the job was open, and it's less than when the job was filled. And I have a null check here because, as you can see, a lot of his dates were still open. And when we look at that, now we can look and can see that, oh yeah, here's a job that was open in October. It's still open. So it's open in October, November, and December. Once the data has been restructured, it's a pretty simple matter to just run an analysis and add those values up. So we know how many were filled each month and how many are still open. Well, if we take a look back, here was our HR manager, and he was sitting there and he was looking, he said, I can't get these dates to match up. And what he needed was a calendar. Once we created that calendar for him using the scaffold technique, the analysis itself was really very simple. It was really very straightforward, but he needed to know how to restructure the data to make that happen. Now, our next example is a little more complex. And this came in, the question on this came in from a inventory manager. And what he wanted to do, he wanted to calculate a metric that's known as days forward or days of inventory on hand. And he works with inventory, and he also works with the production planning. And we're going to look at an inventory model. And I want to take you through, first of all, what his role is. He starts with real sales data or sales history data. And the sales data that he works with is collected in an ERP system, something like Oracle or SAP, for example. And if you're familiar with those systems, data is collected whenever a transaction takes place. And the transaction we're going to look at is a sales invoice. And inside the SAP system or the ERP system, there's a hierarchy, and that hierarchy accumulates the data and it aggregates the data first at the product level, then at the product line level, and then up to the total sales level. Okay? And if we look at what he was looking at, the invoice sale is the line item sale, and it's precise information. We know exactly who bought the product, when they bought it, what the product was, what the SKU was. We know the quantity and the dollar value. That's precise information. It's exactly correct. That's what the data scientist might call the grain of the data. I just think of it as the lowest level in the data set. And then that data is accumulated or aggregated inside his ERP system up to product sales and product line sales and total sales. And as we go up that pyramid, that data is very accurate. Each one of these totals is very accurate. All we're doing is we're just adding numbers together, and computers do that very well. But as we go up higher in the pyramid, it becomes less and less useful. It's accurate, but less useful data. Now, the next step in this process is to create a sales forecast or a demand forecast for the time period and looking forward. And the way that's done inside his ERP system is he starts with the sales history that he knows, which is the most accurate data. And then you start disaggregating and then applying factors on it till you get down to the bottom and create in his case, it was a weekly forecast. Some people use a monthly forecast, but in his case, it was a weekly forecast. And as he went down this pyramid, he starts with this most accurate number that we know, only two values, most accurate but least useful number. And he starts working down by disaggregating the data, and maybe he's applying growth factors, and maybe he's using a forecasting model, and maybe he's got some large discrete values that he's putting in the forecast also. And it breaks down by product, down to the SKU level, and then finally puts a time frame against it. So he's going to pass this information over to the production planners. And the production planners at that point are going to start scheduling production, and they're also going to start purchasing things. And as you go down this pyramid, the data becomes more and more useful. You have to get down to this weekly level to do the production forecast, but it's also the least accurate data on the page. And everybody involved in this process, whether it's the inventory manager, the production manager, the product manager, everybody understands that this data becomes less and less accurate as we disaggregate the data. And for that reason, most people use a very simple metric as a barometer to identify, are we on plan or are we off plan? And when you're working with literally 1,000 SKUs going through a manufacturing facility, you want something that you can identify where the problems are. So the metric that they use is usually referred to as days or days on hand or days of inventory. It's all the same metric. All you do is you take the inventory level in units and divide it by the average daily sales. Now that's where the question came in from our user. He had data that kind of looked like this. I've cleaned it up a little bit and simplified it just a little bit. And what he said is, we got this data, and this inventory value comes from my ERP system. I calculate the average sales, and I'm just taking that number and dividing it by that number to get this number, which is my days on hand, and then I can compare that to some sort of target I've got. And if it's out of line, then I know I've got to do something with it. And he says, I only want to look at the last day of sales. So we've got some filters over here. And he says, what happens when I drill down into this number and I get down to lower levels, things start falling apart. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, let's take a look at what he was doing. And the first thing he's going to do, we'll look at his days on hand calculation. And his days on hand looks something like this. We're only going to look at customer B. I want to focus on customer B here. All he's doing is he's taking his sales or taking his inventory and he's dividing it by this 7 days average sales. So that number right there, and he comes up with this 11 days. So let's take a look at what the 7 days average sales is. Now, this is what he was using for his 7 days of sales. And it's a table calculation. For those of you who are familiar with table calculations, you're probably saying, oh, I see what the problem is already. Well, what he was doing is he was taking the average sales over this column here, the sum of sales, over a 7, and in his mind, it was a 7-day period. The current cell to -6. But table calculations work on that data subset or the data table that's created as you place dimensions on rows and columns, and you filter those dimensions. And it's working on a data table. Table calculations don't know the value that's in a cell. They only know the position in the table of that cell. So what he was actually doing here was looking across 7 records in his data. And if we take a look here and we open up this data set so that we can see what he was looking at, and for customer B here, for example, he thought he was looking over 7 days of sales, and the 7 records spanned the period from February 10th to the 27th. He was looking at 17 days of sales. He wasn't looking at 7 days of sales. So he's obviously getting the wrong answer. And if we were to open up that data and take a look at what it actually looked like, you can see that this is what we call sparse data. Lots of voids, lots of gaps in the data. And he was not calculating the value that he thought he was doing. Well, to fix that, what we needed to do was put some real records into this data set to fill the data set for him. And now it got a little more complex than to create that date ladder in Excel. So I went out to prep, and I put this calculation together where we're making a ladder based on the dates in his data set and all his customer names. And here's the Cartesian join where 1 equals 1. And we took 56 days worth of data times the 6 customer names he has and expanded that data set to 336 records, and then join that back to his raw data in another join, and ended up with 366 records. And all these red values that you see here are records that have been added into the data set. Well, once we did that, we can come back. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Once we completed that, we can come back and we can take a look at this data again. And now we see for customer B, we're using the same data set. I've added a calculation where we put in a ZN function, and you're probably all familiar with the ZN function, that will put a 0 into a real null or a real record that has a null in it. It'll apply a 0 in there, and we add that to our data set. And we can see now for customer B, as we open up the data set, he's looking not at an end date of the 27th. The 27th was the last date that there was a real record, but the end date of the data set was the 29th. And you can look over 7 records and now see a week's worth of data. Oh, he didn't have 11 days worth of inventory. He had 66 days worth of inventory. Well, here we had a subject matter expert. He was an expert in production planning. He was an expert in inventory and forecasting. And he had a real difficult time understanding that the structure of his data was standing in the way of him getting an accurate answer out of the analysis. And working with him, you realize that he didn't understand it, but quite honestly, it's not his job to understand it. It's our job. It's my job. It's your job. We're the data experts. We're the ones that are experts in Tableau. And we need to understand what the limitations are of the source of the data and how that can create problems as he does his analysis. And quite honestly, it's up to us to create a model that will work in all cases. I'd like to tell you that we finally got him on a good page. Actually, he still has difficulty. He still has difficulty with this. And if there's any black belts out there, I tried awful hard to talk him out of doing the analysis this way. There are better ways of managing that inventory and looking at days forward than the approach that he was taking. Okay, now we're going to go to the one last example. We took a look at what happens when you have sparse data. This is a different type of example. And this is an example where there are small pockets where there are no record nulls in the data set. And you hit those pockets by, as you filter the dimensions in your overall analysis. And when you hit them, all of a sudden the screen goes blank. And this question actually came in from a very experienced user. And to be honest with you, I thought this user might be attending the meeting today. I looked earlier, and she is not attending this meeting. But she was a very, very accomplished analyst, and she sent in a problem using Superstore data. And the Superstore data is the same data that you got with your copy of Tableau. And I want to illustrate this problem with a little example of a line chart here. And we're just going to take a look at 2 months worth of data, the February and September of 2016, and a couple of subcategories. We've got art and envelopes over here. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with doing this, but if I go up to analysis and open up view data, we can see the data that's in the summary table is what you visually see, and the full data set is what's underneath this. It's that data table for this particular worksheet. It's a subset of the total data, but you can see here there's 16 rows of data that we're looking at on this sheet. Now, if I come back in and I filter out September, on Tableau. Okay, all of a sudden my chart changes, and if I take a look at the amount of data that's sitting out there, we'll see only 2 data points that are left in the data set. The rest of the data has been filtered out. Now, if I go one step further and I filter out art, and I'm going to look at envelopes for February, all of a sudden my screen goes blank. Now, I get a lot of questions about this. I see questions come into the forum quite frequently on what happened, what do I do, how do I deal with this? Okay, and we'd look at it and we just say, well, you just kind of filtered out the data. Don't filter down so deep. And if I look at the total data for February 2016, we can see that not only is there no data for envelopes, but there is also no data for machines or copiers or bookcases. There were just no sales of those products in that month. And like every ERP system, if there's no record, if there's no transaction, then no data is collected. Well, that sounds like a pretty simple problem to solve, but this is the way her data actually looked. When she sent in the data, she was doing an analysis, and if you're not familiar with this type of analysis, it's known as small multiples. And I encourage you to go out and look and see how this is done. As a matter of fact, Kevin Flerlich has a great plug-and-play model that's used. I actually used it here, but it's a great plug-and-play model to do this type of analysis. It's wonderful if you want to look across dimension and you want to see how each value, how the analysis for each value in that dimension changes as you start making changes in the data set. So here we're looking at all 17 subcategories at the same time. And we're looking at those 2 months again. We're looking at February and September. And the question came in, she said, I got this problem because in my real data, and this was not her real data, she said, in my real data, I'm able to show my user how to look across that entire dimension. And then when they start filtering the data, instead of having 17 categories, I have 13 categories. And her question was 2 parts. The obvious, what happened and what do I do about it? How do I correct this? And as she says, I could never explain this to my user. I mean, I can't explain to them why all of a sudden part of the viz disappeared, and some of the categories that they were looking at disappeared. I just can't explain it to them, and I couldn't expect them to understand it. Well, from what we just looked at, the 4 categories that disappeared, and we saw them just now. We need to fill those once again with a data scaffold. Now this got really complex, and I want to show you what's going on here, because to create the scaffold, we had to take a look at all the dates in the data set, and there were 1,461 dates. And we looked at the 17 subcategories, and we did the Cartesian join, the 1 = 1 Cartesian joins, and we end up with 25,000 records. So we absolutely exploded the data set when we when we did this Cartesian join. And then we joined that back to her individual or her actual data, and we ended up with a little over 28,000 total records. So we just absolutely exploded this data set to make that happen. She had 9,000 orders or 10,000 orders in the data set. Okay. After doing the scaffold, we came back in again, and we needed to put this ZN function back in, just a simple ZN for sales, and we see that in the sales line for all these values. And once we completed that, we were able to filter out September, and we still ended up with 17 categories. Now, this she could explain to her end user without any problem. 4 of those categories, bookcases, copiers, envelopes, and machines, had no sales. And she's able to explain that, and in her real data, she's obviously able to explain that to them also. Now, if we think about it, her issue was twofold. She said, I don't really know what's going on, and I need to figure out how I can be able to see all the data at one time, but I also need to be able to explain it to my user. And if we take a look at the actual data that underlies here, we can see that now we've got real records in for copiers, machines, envelopes, and bookcases, and they're null. There's no data in them. And we were able to fill that with a ZN function. And we gave her something that she could explain to her end user. Once again, it's not the end user's responsibility to fully understand or even appreciate the problems with the data. That's our role. And that's what we have to be able to figure out. And that's what we have to be able to figure out how to get around. Now, there's one more kind of a half issue that it comes up really quite frequently. And I'm going to use the same data set to show you how this one looks also. You may have found cases where you were working with a timeline and you wanted to plot across that timeline, and you knew there were some nulls in the data, so you ended up selecting, show missing values to fill the gaps in the data set. And then you started filtering, and all of a sudden, you ended up losing the initial part of that timeline. And if we take a look at it, I'm going to see if I can I've got something here I'm going to try to move here. So just bear with me a second. Okay. We can look at that. This is the same data set. All I'm doing here is looking at the full year, 2016, 2017, and we're looking across the months, January through December. And I've got phones and copiers, and I can see all my data is sitting there. And if I filter out phones, all of a sudden, my graph looks like this. I no longer have January through April, and June's missing, and some other dates are missing. So I'd probably go up here, and I put in show missing values. But I'm still missing January through June. Now, if I had phones back in there, we could see that, yeah, here we get January through June, but as soon as I filter out phones, I don't have that data anymore. And I take a look and I still have show missing values. Well, the way show missing values works, it takes a look at the data table that underlies the sheet. Once we filter out phones, the first real date in that data set is May of 2016, and the last real date is December of 2017, and it can show the missing values between those two dates. It can't go outside that range to show any missing values. And if you take a look at the text table, we're looking when we have phones in the data set, we can see those records. But as soon as we filter the data set, we lose that January through April data because there's no data to support that in the data set. Well, I'm not going to go through the example of actually doing the Cartesian join and creating the scaffold. It's the same scaffold we used before. But after the scaffold, the data would look like this for copiers only. And you can see we have January through May, and the data is available. And we don't even have to show the show missing values. We can take that off. And now we have real records, even though the records are null at this point. Okay. Well, that's what I wanted to share with you today. We took a look at 3 real use cases, real questions that came into the forum. The questions that I happen to answer, but other people answer them also. And the solution was that the data had to be restructured. We had to take the data and convert it to some other form so that that the user could actually use it in their analysis. Now, the downside, as you saw, is that scaffolding will absolutely explode the data. Now, there's some ways and some techniques that we can use to minimize that or reduce the amount of growth that happened in that data set. There are also other types of problems where the data has to be restructured, where scaffolding is not the answer. And in those cases, we'll have to use a different technique to restructure the data. the other thing to keep in mind is that these are the things that you and I, and we're supposed to be the data experts. Or that's what we're supposed to understand. Or we're the guys that are supposed to understand how to make Tableau fit the user case. And we can't really expect our end user to really understand or appreciate what needs to be done sometimes. I do have some time for questions, I believe. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here in a second. But what you saw today, the workbook that you saw today is already out on my Tableau public site. I've also written this up, and it's part of my blog. And my blog is just jimdehner.com. And you can go out there and download what we saw today. I don't know, are there any questions or anything that you want me to?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. That was great. There was a question in the chat even before you started talking about the possibility
Even
of
before I
data.
started talking.
No, sorry. Before you got to the last slide there about the data blowing up, there was a question with a concern about that. And then a follow-up question was, are there resources that you get more information about that, the different loan types and some of those risks? Do you have any resources you can direct people to?
Okay, you were breaking up a little bit there. Okay, and the question was, are there, Jen, the last part of the question?
Yeah, sorry. I was saying they're looking for resources to better understand the different join types and some of the risks of doing Cartesian joins. Do you know of any books or blogs or websites or something?
Okay, well, let's
detail.
Let's start with the basic question. First of all, the structure of the data needs to be restructured, and I understand that using a Cartesian join is going to blow the data up. We can put limits on the data itself so that we only look between a start date and an end date. Like for the first example we looked at, we'll do a Cartesian join, but we don't have to look at all the dates for each individual record. So you can reduce the amount of the data that way. The second option, when you're faced with this situation, and I do not write SQL, so I'm going to raise my hand, and someone said, well, I don't know how to do that in SQL. Neither do I. But you can write a custom SQL, and when you pull your data in, structure it that way and not do the Cartesian join itself. Now, are there other examples of how to do that? I always go back to the source. Jonathan Drummey and Drawing with Numbers is probably the seminal source on restructuring data. So if you look up Jonathan's blog, Drawing with Numbers, and I know he's got a couple of really good examples out there. So that would be the source that I would go to. Okay.
Great, thank you. And Richard's commenting SQL, SAS, Python. Those are some other ways you can maybe reshape your data without doing the join in Tableau.
Yeah.
Question about your use case or scenario number 3. So this person's asking if there's a category, if the categories that show up in the data, I think they mean the dimension members, is not a fixed set. Can you still use scaffolding?
I'd have to think about. that. I don't quite understand the question, because if you're working with a dimension, the values in that dimension are. I don't quite understand what the question means when you start talking about a fixed set. If the thought process, I can change that dimension by either filtering or using a set. And you can. Yes, you can limit the amount of data, and you can limit what you're looking at. But I'm not so certain where the question is coming from. If it's not the same, are we talking about between different months that you're looking at the data, or what? I'm not really clear on the question. But I'll tell you what, if you want to ping me directly later and explain the question, I'll gladly answer the question for you. I do that every day out on the forum. So
that you do. I commented earlier that you are an absolute legend in the forums. If you've never seen Jim's answers in the forum, you obviously haven't been looking, because you are all over that. And thank you for your service.
Okay, well, Thank you for saying that. And I hope to see some of you at TC. I'm going to be in Las Vegas. So if you're there and you see me, stop by, say hello, shake a hand. I'd love to meet. I'd love to meet up with you. It's good being with you. And if there's no other questions, you can take control of your meeting back, Jen.
Yeah, I was giving it just another second. Anyone else have a question for Jim? Go ahead and pop that in the chat. And that person who asked the question about unstable dimension members, feel free to follow up with Jim directly. Okay, question about other ways to structure data. Oh, and another tug.
Oh, yeah. Can you still hear
Stick
me,
around.
Jen? Jen, I think you froze there for a second.
Oh.
If you want to go out to my blog, I wrote a series called Zero to Zen. And if you go out to my blog and in the first session of Zero to Zen, the last example on there is called age groups, or it's called age. It will show you another way or a different way of overlapping data where you have to make a copy of the data and overlap it with itself. But that's another avenue, but you would only use it in certain cases. But you can go out there and look at that also.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
Thank you for allowing me to do this today. It was an honor to be out there with you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. I am not going to do a super formal introduction of myself. I think a lot of you know who I am. I will just say I have been on the leadership team for the Madison Tug since 2017, so several years now, and I've been using Tableau. I first dabbled in it in late 2014, but I've really been using it daily since 2017. So I love using Tableau. I think it's a great tool. There's some things about it that vex me, like probably happens for all of you. And I think part of the challenge with Tableau is there's so many things to do and so many ways you can approach it that it's difficult to feel like you have a full grasp on all that it can do. So I thought this session might be helpful. I'm just going to go through a few questions that people have asked me or things that I've encountered or learned. And I'm absolutely happy to take some questions from the audience too. We've got some other experts on the call as well. So if it's something I can't answer, probably one of us can help you out. So with that, I'm going to open up the Tableau workbook. Hopefully my internet will continue supporting us here, and we'll jump into some filtering fixes and issues. So I'm going to start with a couple of examples that are on the simpler side, and then we'll get into a little bit more complex stuff. So hopefully it's a little something for everybody here. So right now what we're looking at is just a long list. I'm using Superstore data as well, a long list of manufacturers and just a count of the quantity, or sorry, the sum of how much quantity. So if you only wanted to see some of these items, probably the first thing you would think to do is to put the manufacturer pill onto your filter shelf. And you certainly can do that. But just wanted to mention, in case you hadn't ever explored this or didn't realize you could do it, you can actually filter right from the view itself. So if for whatever reason, maybe or don't want Logitech included, I can just click on it. And actually I can grab something else. We'll grab Boston, O'Sullivan. Maybe I'll switch to my shift key. Let's grab all these. And then you see this little dialog window has popped up and there's a keep only and an exclude. If I keep only, all the other things I didn't select are going to be filtered out. If I pick exclude, the items that I just picked are going to be, sorry, whoever is also sharing audio, would you mind muting yourself? Thank you. If I pick exclude, then the ones I just selected are going to be filtered out. So we'll just do that. Those go away and it puts the filter on the filter shelf for me so that I can go edit that later if I change my mind. But again, just wanted to make sure that you all realize you could do that right from the view itself. And to select those, I used my control key. I'm on a PC, or if you hold down the shift key, you can grab several that are in a group together. So quick, easy way to get a filter based on what you're seeing. All right, next example. This comes up pretty regularly where you've got some dimension members and maybe there's one that's bad data. In fact, let's make this a little easier. I will go put an alias on one of these. Who don't we like today? Binders. We'll call binders invalid. Let's say for whatever reason, you've got some invalid data and you don't want that included in your view. But you do want your user to be able to decide which of these other dimension members they want to take a look at. So if you just put a subcategory filter on here and you want to get rid of my invalid record, but then I also want my user to be able to interact with the filter, they're able to turn invalid back on. But but that's not what I want. I don't want them to see the invalid records. I only want them to see the others. So an easy way to deal with this is to actually make a copy of the dimension that you're wanting to clear out. So I'm going to duplicate that. And I'm going to be a responsible workbook owner. Whoops, didn't mean to double click it there. Be a responsible workbook owner here. And I'll rename this so I remember what I did. I'll just put exclude in the name. And then I highly recommend putting the copied pill and the original in a hierarchy together. So this one's already in a hierarchy. Tableau does that by default now. All the product related items are in a hierarchy together. So I'm going to bring my copied pill into that hierarchy as well. And now what I can do, I'm going to bring that one back, is I bring my copy in and I can exclude those invalid records. And look at that. Invalid has disappeared from my view and it has disappeared from my filter and my user cannot get to it. And the reason that's happening is because Tableau has recognized that these two fields are in a hierarchy together and it's by default showing me only the values that remain in the hierarchy. And this is a relatively new option. I don't remember exactly what version that came out in, but only relevant values can be problematic in that it's less performant. I think they've been working on that, so it might not be as bad as it used to be, but the hierarchy is more performant than only relevant values. So that works really well to have those in a hierarchy together and just get them out of your view. All right, so that was a fairly simple example, but I feel like that one comes up pretty regularly. So there are other ways to achieve that. One thing I will mention, if you filter it out, the data aren't being considered. If you were doing some sort of table calculation and you might want that invalid group or whatever that group you were hiding to still be part of the calculation, in that case, you might not want to filter it out entirely, but rather just hide it. So some scenarios, you may not want to actually take it out of the view, but in this case, assuming that we did, that's an easy way to take care of it. All right, next example. So let's imagine that I had a simple dashboard like this, where I'm looking at sales in this map by region and by state. I've just kind of color coded the regions there. And then I've got another graph down here, and I want people to be able to pick a state from the map and show its sales below. So hopefully you're all thinking action filter. That's how I would do that. You can either go up into the dashboard actions, or the quick way to do that is just to click on the worksheet that you want to serve as the action filter, and then click this little filter button. Okay, I should be good to go, right? Let me click on California. Wait a minute, the bottom graph disappeared, but I know there are sales in California. So what's happening here? The problem is that by default, Tableau is trying to take all the information in this top worksheet, which I'm using as the filter, and pass it down here, but it's getting confused because I've got both region and state in my map. So the way to handle this is to edit that action. So here's the action that Tableau created for me. And again, I'll be a good workbook steward here, and I'll call this map filter, just try to use good habits. And it did what I wanted for the most part. I did want the filter to work on select. I did want it to come from the map. I did want it to show all values when it's cleared. But the way to fix the problem that I'm having right now is down here in this bottom part where it says filter. So by default, Tableau is trying to pass all the fields, but I don't want it to pass all the fields. I only want it to pass over the state. Or conversely, I could have picked region here. So if I say okay there, and then try my filter again, now it's working. Now Tableau knows to only send the California state value into my other chart. I can switch to Iowa, switch up to Wisconsin, and it's working. Hang on, I'm just gonna pop chat open over here just in case there's any questions over here. Okay. All right. Next one. So let's imagine I have a pretty basic graph like this where I'm looking at sales in a particular month for each of my different segments. And let's imagine that this is going to go on a dashboard that's really focused on just the more recent period of time. Sorry, question, how did I go to that? Oh, to fix that action filter. So that's in the dashboard menu under actions. And then this is something that drives me crazy. I'm going to be putting an idea out there. I hope you all will vote for it. I don't know why it defaults to the entire workbook. I usually just want to look at the one that's on the sheet, but in this case, I only have the one. So anyway, dashboard, actions, and then there's my action, and then edit. So that is where I got to that filtering section where I was able to specify that I wanted it to filter on state.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. I was gonna say, hopefully that was your question. Okay.
Yes, it was.
Perfect. So back to this example. So let's say that this graph is going to live on a dashboard that's going to be focused on just the most recent month. And so I don't want to distract my user from that main purpose, but maybe as context, I do want them to be able to see what the trend of sales has looked like for each of these segments. So I'm going to build myself a trend chart, which I've actually already built. And it's okay that it's got a lot going on right now, because I'm going to use it as a viz and tooltip and only show the one segment at a time. So I've got my sheet built. I've got my sheet here. To put that into the tooltip, I just open up the tooltip, use the insert button, pick my sheet. I want my trend. It pastes some code in for me. All right, here we go. Hover. And wait a minute, that is not what I wanted. I was hoping to show my whole trend line, and instead it's giving me just one data point. This is actually a very similar problem to what we just looked at on that dashboard, where Tableau is trying to pass all of the information through. And since this viz is filtered down to just the 1 month, it's only passing that info into my other sheet. But I can edit the code here as well. So if you haven't ever noticed these elements of the code, let's get a little tutorial here. So right now you see this last part of the code that Tableau inserted that says all fields. That's the part I want to change here. I don't want it to send over all fields. I just want it to send over segment. And I'm typing this myself, but you can instead use the insert button there too and pick it from here. So now that I've changed that to segment, when I hover, it's only passing through the segment piece of information and not also the date. And so then I get my full trend line. So there, solved that problem. And then I also will just mention, in terms of this code, if you've never tried to play around with this, you might notice that it says max width and max height. Those are adjustable too. So since my trend line is pretty long, maybe I want to give it a little more room. I can bump that up to 600 and it spreads that out a little more. So those are things you can edit that maybe you didn't realize you could. And sometimes you need to in order to get it to work in the way that you wanted it to. All right. Next example. So here I've got just a basic bar chart of sales in each month. And let's say that I only wanted my user to focus on the most recent 5 or 6 or whatever that number might be. Let's do 5. So there's a lot of ways you could get to that. One way that I find really helpful is to use a top N filter. So order date is what I want to filter on. So I'll bring that out onto my filter shelf. And I'm looking at this by month. So I'll pick the month year option. And then I get a long checklist of all the options. And yes, I could check off the 5 at the end, but the problem with that is next month, when I get a new month of data, those 5 will still stay the 5 that I picked, and it won't automatically pick up the next one. Tableau, several versions ago, added this ability to open to the most recent one, but it's just the most recent one. And I want the most recent 5. So that's where this top filter comes in. So I'm going to do that by field. And let's say I want the top 5. And yes, you could parameterize this, make a parameter where your user can pick the number here, but we'll just do it this way for now. And then I will put in my date field. Whoops, that was ID, clicked poorly. Put in my date field. I want to not do it by count, but by the maximum, the topmost date. If I click apply, look at that. I now get my most recent 5 months. And next month, when I get a new month of data, it will still be the most recent 5. So I don't know how many people think of a top 5 in terms of dates, but it works really well for that. Okay. Next tip. So let's say I have this dashboard that's got a couple of graphs called trend, because these are just some trend lines. And let's say I want to let user filter all of these by state. So just going to talk a little bit about process of adding a filter. So I can go to any one of these worksheets and I can bring out it's under location, bring out state as a filter. And we'll just start with, we'll just add all of them for now. That doesn't really matter. So I can apply this filter to other worksheets right from here. If I click on it, go down to apply to worksheets, say selected, I can choose. But if your workbooks look anything like mine, at some point you have a whole lot of sheets in here. And this is kind of a pain to remember, what exactly did I call that? As I've said, I'm trying to model good workbook behavior here, but even the best of us might have trouble picking out the ones we're looking for here. So a couple of tips to make this easier. One is, if I knew when I built these 3 sheets that live on the dashboard that they go together in the dashboard, one thing you can do, I'll color all of them, is change the tab color. I change that to red, let's say. Then Tableau does this really helpful thing. When I go to apply the sheet, it actually shows me which sheets have color. So now it's much easier for me to see that those are the 3 that belong together, even if I didn't remember what I called them. So that's helpful. But I actually would suggest that you go to the dashboard itself. If I want the filter to apply to all of these and it's going to live on the dashboard, now that I've put it on the one sheet, I can add it to the dashboard from that sheet. I click on it, see this little down caret, and it shows me what filters are available. So I can bring out state. And then when I go to apply it to worksheets here, because it's on the dashboard, Tableau automatically gives me only the sheets that are on the dashboard. And now that's a lot easier than having to scroll through my entire list of sheets. All of those methods work, but this one I think is especially easy if you've got a lot of things in your development. If there's another sheet that's not here that I want to add it to, you still can get those into your list by clicking the show all worksheets in workbook. But I love how by default, it just shows the ones that are already on the dashboard. So depending on how you developed, maybe your sheets made it onto the dashboard first, and then you get told, oh, by the way, we need a filter for this, because that happens. This can help you do that more efficiently. So thought I would share that little tip. All right, and then the next couple of tips aren't actually about a filter at all. It's about an alternative way to add and remove things from your view. So let's imagine that I'm looking at my quantity, sales, it doesn't really matter, for my 3 different categories. And let's say I want my user to be able to add and take away subcategories and see how that affects the impact on the quantity. If I put that subcategory out here as a filter, it's going to remove the data entirely. So if I put subcategory here and I only choose a couple of them, the data from the others are going to be removed entirely. But that's not really what I want. This is a perfect use case for a set, because a set doesn't have to take all of the data out. It can show you what's in the set versus what's out of the set. So to make one, which I've already done, you can just click on the pill or the dimension that you're wanting to turn into a set, go down to create a set, and then call it something good. I'll just leave that for now. Include whatever items you want. We'll start with all of them. And then that's your set. So here I already have that. I called it subcategory set, and I'm showing it here on the screen. And then when I use this set, I'll take it off here for a second, but when I use this set on color, now what happens is when my user interacts with it, the data don't get filtered out. They get put in and out of the set. And now I can start to see some cool things happening where you can see my bars are adjusting. So now I can see what proportion of my office supplies includes these things and what proportion doesn't. This isn't maybe a perfect use of this because I don't think it's super intuitive for a user which is which, just trying to give you the idea of this proportional brushing or what aspect of the total is made up of these members. It's maybe a little easier to see this in pie chart format where I have my sum of sales on my segment amount, same idea here where I brought my set out onto color. And then as I add and move things, or I should say as I remove things, it changes my pie. You can also put this on the label. So maybe I want to know what is my sum of sales for each of my groups. So I can do that, can turn that into a table calculation to show percent of total. So now it's the different proportions of my pie. So again, a good way, If you don't want to take the data out entirely, but do want people to be able to interact with what's in and what's out, sets work really well in this type of situation. And those were my examples. So we have just a couple minutes left. I'm going to take a quick roll through the questions and see if there's anything here that didn't get addressed. Yes, questions about multiple sheets and tooltips. Here, I'll just go ahead and show that. So yes, you can do the same thing. You can just insert another sheet and pop it right below there if you wanted. You can actually just grab this code and do it yourself if you wanted, and just change the sheet name. Jeff Schaefer has a blog post about where, I think it's Jeff Schaefer, maybe it's Andy Kriebel. One of them had a blog post where they talked about how they kind of made this template sheet and then brought their other sheets into it and did fancy things with the sizing. So it looked like a really cohesive, beautiful tooltip. So if you want to get extra fancy, you can do stuff like that. But yes, absolutely, you can put more than one sheet in here. So you want to make sure that the filter you're passing through makes sense for both. But yes, you can certainly do that. Okay, quick scroll through. Bar chart, percent of total. Yes, I could do the percent to total like I did for the pie on the bar. Good call. Set actions. Does the set include new members? Ooh, gosh, that is a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that off the top of my head. So if a new subcategory showed up in my data, would the set update accordingly? Does anybody else on the call know the answer to that off the top of their head?
Yes, it will, Jen.
Cute. That is the all hoping to hear. Perfect. Thank you for that. All right. And then the question about select all on dashboard button. If you add a new worksheet to the all filter. Sorry, Nicole, I'm trying to make sure I understand your question. Select all on dashboard button. Oh, for the filter over here where I added this on.
Yeah, from the dashboard view.
I do not believe it will. So I don't understand why this is inconsistent behavior. My understanding is that if I apply a filter to all sheets on dashboard, adding in new sheets will not apply the filter to them. However, if I have an action on my dashboard that applies to sheets, when I bring a new one in, it automatically applies that action to it, which sometimes is really annoying because I didn't actually want my new sheet to get that action. So I have to remember to go check for those, but I'm 95% sure it will not do that to your filters. Anyone feel differently, feel free to chime in.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
Jen, each one of your worksheets has a separate data table, and the filters you are applying are applied to the data table on that worksheet. And in your case, where you have a dashboard and you add a dimension, add a value to a dimension in a single worksheet, it's only on that worksheet. It's not on the entire dashboard.
Okay. All right. Any last questions? Remember, this is also a way to get into our drawing for our next 2 Tableau swag winners. So last call for questions here. Everybody's furiously thinking, what can I ask? What can I ask?
Hi, Jen.
Yeah, hi.
I have a question, but not on this particular dashboard.
Okay.
It's on the map dashboard that you were showing earlier. So I see that you have like your, you kind of marked your own territories like West, Central, Southeast. I was wondering if you have any idea if, like, let's say I want to limit it not by state, but like by zip code. And like, let's say for California, like I'm like the first level is like, okay, if zip code equals X, then territory A, and then all other zip codes, territory B, or like, yeah, like a logic like that, and then apply to territories. Because it seems like Tableau only allows you to pick either zip code, county, or state, but I'm trying to do like not just zip code. I'm trying to do zip code and county and state together, if that makes sense.
Have you used map layers? That's what I did here. So that's in 2021.2.
No, I've not used map layers.
Yeah, so that's how I built this. So one layer is the state level. So here I've got my state as my level of detail. And then my other layer is where I've got the region, and that's where I colored my regions differently. So in this case, I'm just dragging the postal code field out, and it's giving me the option to drop that down as another layer. And there my postal codes are showing up. So I'm thinking what you're describing might be solved easily by layers. Just put your different layers on here and then tell your action filter which one you want to pass through to your other views. If I'm not understanding that correctly, feel free to post that in the chat and we'll see if we can address that a little bit more.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I didn't see any more questions come in. So we are going to move ahead to our giveaway. Getting my screen. I should just pause sharing, but whatever. Okay, giveaway winners. So Pat McCormick has been paying attention to who's been participating. So we know KH won earlier for Kahoot. Pat, who are our other two winners for participating in the chat?
Yeah, congratulations to KH, otherwise known as K Howell, and the other chat winners throughout the presentations were Rhonda Tan and Dawn Weisky. Congratulations.
Excellent. Congrats, and thank you for participating and for being in our meeting today. This is why we do it, is for all of you. So go get yourself something fancy. All right, just wanted to give you an update on some upcoming events. Olivia, is this mine or yours? Sorry, am I stealing your thunder again?
Nope, you've got it from here to the end.
Okay. Yeah, we absolutely prepared for this. No, thank you.
We practiced very heavily.
practiced a
Yep.
lot. So some upcoming events. We have our next Tableau meetings already scheduled. So April 28th is our all Wisconsin TUG. That one's always been virtual, continuing as virtual. We are featuring Kyle Massey for that one. So come on out and join us on April 28th. We talked about earlier TC22 coming up in mid-May. Milwaukee TUG's having their next meeting May 26th. I believe that's also virtual. And then, as I said at the beginning, we're really hoping to have an in-person meeting for our next Madison TUG at that Lakeview shelter in Middleton, June 7th. We will let you know if that's a no-go, and then we may end up changing the date a little bit as well, but it will be in June, sometime in June. You can always keep up with our current events there at our link you see on the screen. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for joining us today. On behalf of all of the leadership team, we really appreciate you coming out, participating, asking great questions, being engaged. We're a community and you're all a big part of that. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Jen, I'll just interject quickly on the next Wisconsin TUG. It's Kyle Massey and a coworker of his just started a program called the Coders Initiative. And the next Wisconsin TUG, don't be intimidated by the word coders, but it's going to give a functional overview of all the Tableau APIs and what they can do and how you might be able to apply them, whether that be you or someone else in your company. It won't go into a lot of detail, but Kyle will also describe the Coders Initiative, which is this neat structured program where you can go kind of like Jim's Zero to Zen with coding, from zero coding experience to actually coding interaction with these APIs. So very excited about that. And we are going to do breakout rooms to facilitate networking. So looking forward to that as well.
Excellent. Thanks for that extra detail. And thank all of you. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, the rest of your month. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.